Hello,
Hello,
everyone.
everyone.
I'm Diane Hessen, board member of the NACD New England chapter. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our virtual program, Quantum Computing, Staying Ahead of the Technology Curve. We all have a lot that we want to learn today. First, we have a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, a reminder to remain muted throughout the program and to use the chat function to pose questions. There is no need at all to wait until the Q&A
Oh,
portion of the event to submit questions. We will monitor the chat box during the panel discussion and intersperse the questions as they come up. Next, we know many of you want to receive credits for this program. To receive credit, we need to know your full first and last name, so please make sure that your full name is visible in your Zoom window. Finally, NACD and the NACD chapter network organizations are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations dedicated to providing directors with the opportunity to discuss timely governance oversight practices. The views of the speakers and audience are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of NACD. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our chapter sponsors. The continued loyalty of these organizations underscores the important role of NACD. It is their support that allows us to fulfill our mission of delivering world-class, director-centric local programming and peer-to-peer sharing of insights that is vital to advancing excellence in the boardroom. Thank you to all of you. Today, we are highlighting a special spotlight sponsor, Deloitte, who has continued to support our mission of excellent corporate governance. Deloitte, thank you so much for your support. Next, I just want to take a minute to welcome our first time attendees here with us today. Thank you all for joining us. We truly hope you enjoy your first program, and we hope to see you at many more. Finally, I want to thank a few people at NACD New England who were instrumental in coordinating today's event. Ellen Richstone, board member and programming chair, Deb Rosenthal, executive director, and Larissa Rivetto, chapter administrator. Thank you for all your efforts bringing this program to our members. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my dear friend and this program's moderator, Jackie Schoback. Jackie is the co-founder of 1414 Ventures, which is totally focused on the digital identity sector. Jackie is a public board director and former C-suite executive across a number of financial services companies. She has written numerous articles on data privacy, AI, data security, and governance topics, and has received a number of prestigious awards. Jackie, thank you for joining us today. Over to you.
thank you, Diane. I am thrilled to be here and excited to moderate this discussion. With me today, we have Ed Durkin. Ed is the Chief Financial Officer of Quera Computing. Throughout his career, Ed has driven financial performance, strengthened governance, led capital raises and IPOs, and advanced corporate growth across both public and private technology companies. We also have Nate Gamelke. Nate is the co-founder and chief technology strategist at Quera Computing. Nate's been recognized for his contributions to quantum and is the recipient of many notable awards. In addition, he has several patents in various stages of approval for his methods and inventions in this field. Ed and Nate, welcome, and thank you both so much for joining us here today and for being here. Before we dive into the panel, I'd like to take just a few minutes to set some context. Larissa, if we can pull up the slide. Perfect. So, quantum computing has been dubbed the next fire moment, like the discovery or invention of fire. And estimates of its impact range from 850 billion, as you can see here on this chart, which is where BCG has it, to 2 trillion, which is where McKinsey pegs it. And of course, Quantum Insider, which is a leading market intelligence, and quantum technology firm, puts it right at 1 trillion, which is the median. But what I wanted to draw your attention to is if you look at the chart, you'll see there's a dashed line, a dashed gray line on the smartphone market and where that was benchmarked, which came out at about 600 billion. So you can see quantum is huge. It's a multiple of that by estimates. And it's poised to impact all industries. Larissa, if we can go to the next page, please. So, as you can see here, it's not only big, but it's pervasive. Everything from financial services to energy, to automotive, to aerospace, to healthcare, pharmaceuticals. It's pervasive. So, Larissa, you can take down the slides. So, it's big, it's pervasive, and the future is here. Let's unpack what all this means. So, Nate, we're going to start off with you with what I sort of call the quantum basics or 101. So, if you could start us off, please, with what is quantum computing, just in basic lay terms, please.
Well, Jackie, you kind of teed me up there. It's trillion-dollar industries. We're not quite there yet. Is one message that I want to start with. But I mean, the basic question of like, why is it likely that quantum computing has the kind of impact that you just described? Why is it such a crosscut? We live in an information age, right? So we understand the power of information processing. And, that was built with classical computing, classical communication in mind, right? And so for the last, probably nearly 100 years, we have been working on refining the systems that use kind of classical mechanics, the way a physicist would understand it, to represent and process information. So classical computing, you're familiar with the idea of the smallest unit of information that we can really represent as a bit, right?
That's right.
Well, in classical information, a bit is basically some kind of mechanical object or electrical object that can be in one of two states, like a 0 or a 1, right? So we're used to this kind of binary representation of things. So classical mechanics, as a physicist understands it, understands the world by the state that things are in. Okay, and those words, they sound very simple, and they're very powerful, but they actually don't describe the world as we know it fully. And that's because about 100 years ago, we figured out quantum mechanics. Okay, so if you make things very, very small, typically what you find is that they start to obey the laws of quantum mechanics better and better. And so, for instance, things that represent bits, if they're taken down to the extreme limit of just, say, a single particle, right? A good example is we at Query use quantum bits that are just single atoms, right? And a single atom, you can actually flip its state by changing the state that the electrons are in inside the atom. But what you find out from quantum mechanics is that rather than just being in a state of 0 or 1, you can actually put them into a state of 0 and 1 at the same time. I know that's very spooky, but that's basically the underpinning of quantum mechanics. We call that superposition. Okay. Now, you can actually have many bits. In fact, your computing or processing or communication system gets more powerful if you have more bits in it. In quantum mechanics and quantum computers, all of those bits can be in superpositions. But even more special than that is that we can start to do what's called entangle the qubits together. And what entanglement means is that the states of those quantum bits are kind of wrapped up with each other. They're correlated to each other. And that actually allows us to represent with the same number of bits or quantum bits exponentially more information than we would with a classical computer. So the art of quantum computing is basically trying to get a hold of quantum systems that are big and have many qubits in them and can use these two special techniques of superposition and entanglement to represent information and process it in important ways. If you go back to the 1980s, basically the first time that people really conceived of the power of a quantum computer, one of the most important ideas there was the idea of using entanglement and superposition in a quantum computer to do things like factor integers. Okay, this is one application that we knew very early about quantum computers. You can actually prove that with exponentially fewer steps on a quantum computer, you can factor the same integer as you could on a classical computer. And so that was the first time that people really got the idea of how powerful a quantum computer could be. But it's taken us all of this time since the 80s to try to figure out how to get control over systems good enough and make them scalable enough that we can make powerful quantum processors by having a lot of quantum bits in them. So I think, and I think Ed would agree with me, that the ultimate evolution of that is actually go back to some of the very basic first statements that were made about quantum computers. Richard Feynman in the 80s, when he gave a famous lecture defining what a quantum computer is, said, what I'm imagining here is you can just get a bunch of single quantum spins and line them up on a line. The first time that we did that as a company and as founders of this team was about 2018, 2019, when we put about 50 atoms in a line and basically just did exactly what Richard Feynman suggested to make a quantum computer. Finally, we had enough control over these systems to be able to do something like that. Started out in a Harvard MIT basement down the street. We commercialized that technology, and I'm happy to say we're now building systems that are even hundreds and thousands of qubits of this type. And we have a scalable architecture that we really believe can kind of deliver on that promise of ultimately computing things like factoring integers, which is an important application. We're not quite there yet, but we're probably just a few years away.
Wow. Nate, that was a fabulous unpacking of the basics of quantum in lay terms. So thanks for doing that. I did want to ask you, because I'm sure it's on people's minds, there's been a lot of conversation about what's made quantum possible today and the power of the chip, right? Just as you were talking about qubits. Can you comment on that, just the power of the chip?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we live in a world full of microchips, right? We're speaking through the actions of microchips as we speak right now. And a lot of modern technology was, enabled by the techniques that allow us to put a lot of individual transistors and so forth on a single chip. And so microelectronics has been extremely powerful for us. I will remind you that the very first computers were made out of mechanical switches, right? So really, microelectronics was what enabled us to really scale, pack these things reliably onto individual dies. And of course, you're familiar with Moore's law, right?
Oh, yes.
Law has said that we have kind of an exponential increase in computing capacity over time. As a physicist, Moore's law isn't really a law, right? As a technologist, Moore's law is really stating kind of the capacity of mankind to innovate on that space. I will say that, over my lifetime, people have been predicting the end of Moore's law for quite a while. And I do believe that there will be an end to Moore's law as a physicist because there is a certain limit to how small you can make transistors. And once you get to that limit, they start actually behaving quantum mechanically. At that point, you're essentially, whether you want to or not, going to have to build a quantum computer. Then the way that you process information changes, and that's exponential growth. Now, I love microchips, and I've spent a life, partially as an electrical engineer, partially as a physicist, exploiting the power of microelectronics. But I will say that as you get into the quantum domain, the things that you work with need to be as elemental as possible and as isolated from the environment as possible. So not all of the quantum computers that are made are actually made with microelectronics. In fact, if you look at the modalities, you can split them up about half-half, those which are made on chips and those which are made in other ways. A great example are the ones that Ed and I build together. What we do is we use individual atoms that are kind of levitated inside of a vacuum chamber. So there's no microchip anywhere there. And in fact, what we use is laser beams that are projected in using optical holography and all of these advanced methods of photonics to basically grab individual atoms, cool them down to very close to absolute zero temperature, about a millionth of a degree Celsius above absolute zero. And then we manipulate them with more laser light. It's really important that you have a system to build quantum computers that doesn't heat up. Right.
Right.
And so actually having a microchip in some ways is a difficult thing to get over because that chip is always warm to some extent. It's got to be put into a cryostat to work in the first place. And the cryo cooling power can be pretty extreme once you try to build things that scale to large qubit numbers. So
Right.
we really like the fact that our qubits are just kind of levitating there in vacuum because they're very well isolated. That prevents the quantum information from kind of leaking into the environment. It's called decoherence, and it's the major limitation to how a quantum computer works.
Right.
But also, it's just very easy for us to put many, many, many single atoms in place to make many, many qubits.
Nate, I love it. No chips. I love it. You've bypassed it. Just real quick, because I know one of the questions I am sure everyone has on their minds is very briefly, can you just tell us how is quantum computing different than generative AI? I feel like a lot of people confuse those two things.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways we confuse it every day because we're learning that the two have a lot to do with each other, but they are distinct things. So, if you go back, actually, it's kind of amazing how fast the world is moving. But if you just roll back to the founding of quantum computing, that was about 7 years ago, we actually didn't know what would come first, a useful quantum computer on its own or artificial intelligence. And so when we thought about our technology roadmap, there's a huge bifurcation there. We really didn't know the practical value of things like Gen AI when we started building these quantum computers. Flash forward a little bit, we know that artificial intelligence is a part of our world. I scripted this conversation before we showed up today with Gen AI. No, I'm just kidding. I did not use ChatGPT to prepare my remarks. It's obvious at this point. But I will tell you that the intersection of Gen AI, which is powered entirely today by classical computers, and quantum computing, there is a strong intersection there, and it goes both ways, right? So one thing is that we can use AI tools today to help us design quantum computers, and that's kind of, you would expect that to be happening.
Right.
All of us are using AI a bit in our jobs. But there are two kind of more intimate ways that AI and quantum computing intersect. One is that it actually takes quite a bit of intelligence. We learned this after we built our first quantum computer to operate one. Okay, which is to say that these computers are actually very physical devices at this point. They're pretty exploratory research and development kind of vehicles. And when you ask us to run a quantum computing algorithm, typically what's happening is we've got PhDs behind the screens that are kind of fine-tuning the machine to operate and make sure that it works well. One of the things that we've learned is that AI can actually step in on what we call the control plane of the quantum computer and twist the knobs in just the right way to be very smart to make sure that it always executes its applications optimally. That turns out to be a very powerful tool. Another thing that we've learned how to do is make quantum computers fault tolerant. Okay, we can start doing things like error correction. Error correction is basically taking the problems that you have and making a scalable quantum computer, basically trying to make them go away by detecting the errors in the quantum computer and then correcting for them. This has been a huge thing that we've been trying to do for decades, and we finally figured out in the last couple of years how to do error correction. It turns out AI is also very good at looking at the errors, decoding them, and being able to do that at scale. So we're starting to learn how to put pretty high performance computing resources onto the control plane of the quantum computer and actually have it run using AI. It doesn't stop there though. In some ways that's a little bit parasitic, relationship between quantum computing and AI. Quantum computing can actually give back to AI as well. So another thing that we've learned over the last few years is that the ideas behind artificial intelligence and machine learning have a kind of natural extension into a domain where they're using quantum computers. And so this is a bigger topic that we oftentimes call hybrid computing. It's hybrid quantum and classical computing. But having AI that has a quantum computer as basically an assist tool, inside of this kind of large classical computer is a small quantum processor. What it does is it gives access to that AI system to data that would be exponentially more difficult for it to generate using only classical computers. A really good example of this is today people use artificial intelligence to help design drugs. Drugs that are small molecules. Oftentimes we need to understand the quantum properties of the molecule itself to be able to design the drug. So just AI on its own, using classical computers, has made huge advances in trying to understand the electronic structure of small molecules and then predict their therapeutic value as a drug. What we can do now is actually use a quantum computer to generate some of the quantum data that is really expensive for supercomputing classical systems to be able to figure out on their own. So with just a few qubits, we can actually simulate what happens with an entire molecule. And that by comparison, is typically done on some of the largest supercomputing systems in the world.
Right.
So having AI with that kind of access to that quantum data is a super powerful tool, and we're just on the research and development side starting to see the power of that.
Amazing. So it sounds like, yeah, the hybrid models are early days of sort of unlocking this super intelligence, which is coming. We're going to switch gears a little bit, and Ed, I'm going to go to you and ask you. It was great. Nate was able to tell us a little bit about Quora. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit and just give us a quick picture of some of the other players, public or private, startup or more mature. Like who else is really in this space and how is it evolving?
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you, Jackie. So first, for the board members in the audience, I would suggest there is a quantum revolution coming very soon. And quantum is truly disruptive new deep tech. Nate just mentioned the concept of levitated, entangled cold atoms being manipulated by lasers. So it is deep tech, but it's real and it can literally change the world. And that results in major opportunity and also risks for companies, which board members should be aware of now. As to some of the contextual data points for board members in the audience, and to your question, the revolution is reflected in spending by these large cap tech leaders like IBM and Google. Specifically, IBM has committed billions over the next 5 years for quantum and AI. And Google built a, quantum AI campus in Santa Barbara, and analysts estimate they're spending 300 million plus per year on their superconducting quantum computers. And again, like these are mature, well-run companies with business cases and ROIs underlying this massive investment. So it is indeed real. And as you pointed out on your slides, the TAM for quantum is massive. As to other players, the revolution is further evidenced by capital flows to pure play quantum companies. Some examples are IonQ, D-Wave, Rigetti, and most recently a company called Inflection. Um, Notwithstanding modest top line revenues and large operating losses, they all enjoy market caps of multi-billion dollars today because of the promise and potential of quantum. Uh, Quora, and not to make this a Quora infomercial by any means, I mean, we're still private, but we announced a $230 million financing early in 2025 with Google, the largest investor, followed by NVIDIA investing in Quora as well. So there's really a lot of money pouring into quantum. And I think it's behind this investor sentiment that, like NVIDIA, who captured the GPU market, several years ago, and now has grown to a $4.4 trillion market cap company and just posted a $68 billion revenue quarter. Like, I think investors believe quantum, the winner in the quantum space represents, the next NVIDIA-like investment opportunity. And, finally, evidencing the revolution, and Nate's a specialist on this for us. Uh, Global governments and governmental entities are investing a lot in quantum, as they know the revolution is coming too. And there's a lot of money flowing into quantum. It is coming. It's coming sooner than most people would have predicted a couple of years ago. So now is like an ideal time to board members to get educated on quantum.
And actually, Ed, to that point, so let's switch gears a little bit and get down to some brass tacks. Can you, for the audience, talk a little bit about the key problems that quantum computing can address from a business standpoint once we have quantum advantage? And as everyone heard Nate say, quantum advantage is when quantum computers can perform better than classical. We're not there yet, but I think I heard these two say it's in the not too distant future. I'm sure they won't tell us exactly when, but it's in the not too distant future. So Ed, please chime in on those use cases.
Sure thing, Jackie. And it is in the near future. It is coming, but and as you know, there are many use cases for quantum, including such things as, improving early detection and diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, which is really difficult today. A short summary of three primary, what I'll call opportunity use cases and one risk use case for board members in the audience, would be number one, which I would classify as an opportunity. It's something Nate touched on. It's related to healthcare and drug discovery. Quantum computers have the ability to simulate molecular interactions needed for modeling these complex enzymes and proteins far better than classical. And as an example of some companies doing it today, Roche and Qubit Pharma are using quantum tech, and Quera is actually working with Merck and Amgen. So that's number
Nice.
one. Number two, again, I would classify as an opportunity. And as your slide depicted, it's in the financial services sector and financial modeling. Like there are millions and millions of variables in optimizing portfolios and pricing derivatives, and quantum can do that modeling far better than classical. And as to real world examples, you've got JP Morgan, who's announced a major quantum initiative, and Goldman and HSBC are also on record as early adopting quantum. A third, again, an opportunity use case, it's logistics and supply chain optimization. Again, quantum computers can evaluate multiple variables far better than classical, for most efficient routes or schedules. And as an example here, we recently completed an optimization effort for a major European telecom company. The fourth one is what I would classify as a risk of quantum. And hopefully the companies where these board members in the audience, where they sit on the board, hopefully those companies have started thinking about this. As very brief background, most digital security solutions today use encryption from either RSA or ECC, elliptical curve. And what I'm going to say next is very much a forward-looking statement, a lot of forward-looking caveats. This is not Quera specific. But recent industry articles have suggested that quantum is going to be able to crack or break RSA and ECC in the not too distant future. And it's driven by the improvements in quantum hardware, software, and algorithms that are happening like very fast today. So many companies are now working on, post-quantum cryptography solutions and security in the post-quantum world. And, board members in the audience, for your companies, if nothing has been done on quantum and this cryptography breaking risk, now is an ideal time to start because it will take time to prepare. And it's projected to happen in the not too distant future.
Okay, so that was great. So we got the not too distant future, which I do want to just quickly ask, and maybe Ed or Nate, you can either one of you can comment on this. What is required for us to make that leap from where we are today to quantum advantage? Like just in lay terms, what's really required? Do we have the capability? Is it just a matter of rollout, or is there still stuff we need to invent or discover?
I would love to answer that question.
Okay.
Back when we were talking about the difference between classical computing and quantum computing, I mentioned Moore's law, right? And Moore's law was a great way of just capturing for classical computers, how powerful are they going to be over time, right? Now, for quantum computing, we already have an information processing industry built around classical computers and Moore's law. So the thing that we really fixate is when is quantum going to improve that, right? So there's a crossover point there. And we have not actually hit this. It's kind of surprising that we haven't already, but we really don't have a useful application that we've run on a quantum computer where it actually did the job faster than a classical computer. So we have not really reached that point. We will probably reach that point maybe within just a few years. Okay, so we are pretty close to that. My personal belief is that once we do that, we will hotly debate whether it has been done, probably for a few years afterwards, while quantum computers continue to get more powerful. But you asked, what do we need to do? So quantum computers themselves have a kind of Moore's law like behind them as well, okay, which is to say that if you can run a quantum computation on a processor that has enough qubits, that's one really important parameter, and then run it for enough operations, long enough, is enough steps to basically do all the steps of a computation. The kind of product of those two numbers, like how many qubits and how many gates you can run, in some senses is the kind of transistor count that corresponds to a quantum computer, the way that Moore's law did for a classical computer. So if you want to look at the progress of quantum computers over time, you have to keep your eye on those two numbers or the product of those two numbers. And that's basically the quantum Moore's law. How quickly is that increasing? If you look at the last 5 years or so, you will see different modalities of quantum computers all have their own little curve here. Every year there's more qubits. Every year there's larger gate depth. Gate depth is the interesting one because basically this is how long can you run a quantum computer? How many gates can you do? Basically kind of like the equivalent of like the ors and the ands that you have in a classical computer. Quantum computers have those too. You basically count how many of those you can do before you run into an error, right? So there's that bugaboo word, error. Errors in the quantum world come from decoherence, and when a quantum computer decoheres, it becomes only as good as a classical computer at that point. So basically, that question of how many steps can you go before you hit an error, that's where we had a huge breakthrough in the last 2 years. Quantum error correction is a kind of tool that is very similar to in classical computers. They also use error correction. But what it does is it says, look, if you could only go so long before you hit an error, why don't you detect that error and now correct for it? So if you can make quantum processors do that, in a sense, like they can almost run forever after that. So quantum error correction is something that we really started doing as an industry just a couple of years ago, and I'm really proud to say our company was one of the first to really pull off error correction in a real way. But once you can do that, the gate depths get very, very large. So one of the best places to look at, kind of an analysis of the question of when are quantum computers really going to be useful is to look at a DARPA program. DARPA invented the internet, and I still joke that they use the original version of it for themselves. I have to submit things into the DARPA system, so that's a pain for me. But DARPA has always, been on the leading edge. The D in DARPA, is we think of it for disruption, right? So there's positive forms of disruption as well as risky forms of disruption, like Ed was talking about. And DARPA really focused on this question: when are quantum computers going to disrupt and achieve quantum advantage? When are they going to have enough qubits and gate depth to do this? They ran a program called the Quantum Benchmarking Program and extended it into another program called the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative. And these are two programs that first assessed for different applications, how powerful does your quantum computer need to be? And then secondly, started working with the companies one by one, looking at their technology and looking at their entire roadmap out to the point that they believe that they'll start to be useful on those applications that they figured out the resource requirements for. This is a highly visible program, highly competitive program. Queria is a part of this program, but so are other companies like IBM, right? And others, about 12 companies in total in that program. And DARPA has been taking a hard look, diving into the technology stacks with the companies, trying to understand where the pitfalls might be, really trying to vet whether those roadmaps work or not. And so far, it seems like quite a few companies do have a tractable approach to get to that point of quantum advantage. And, I think it's a different answer for every company. What you're looking at is when DARPA started that program just a few years ago, they said, if you believe that you're going to make a useful quantum computer, we want to hear from you because we don't think that you can. That's literally how that program started. Now, a few years later, I think DARPA is starting to feel like multiple of these companies have a pathway to make a useful quantum computer. So that's where the inevitability really is coming from, is this just a few years ago starting to do error correction. And now we feel that fault-tolerant quantum computers that are able to process through those errors and just power through them, make very long circuits, I think is an inevitability. That's a tough word to say.
Yep. No, that's great. Very, very, very helpful. I want to go back to a little bit about what Ed was chatting about. So those, because we've had some questions in the chat, which I feel like you mostly answered, the four big problem sets: simulation, optimization, machine learning, and then of course cryptography. And I think you gave some great examples, from financial services to, drug discovery and transportation, and there's a myriad, and we saw it on the first few slides when we started the program on just how pervasive this is going to be. But Ed, I wanted to come back to you to ask a little bit more just about, I'd sort of say the risks and the opportunities. Maybe from a board member's perspective, maybe we can start a little bit with just what are some of the risks that board members need to kind of have in mind and need to be thinking about as it relates to quantum from a governance standpoint.
So I think, Jackie, from a governance standpoint, from a risk perspective, one of the biggest ones is being ready for the day when quantum computers can break RSA and ECC.
Right.
And you need time to prepare for that eventuality. And now is an excellent time to start. I would put that at the top of my risk list. The other thing board members need to understand is quantum is also an opportunity for, market share gains and competitive differentiation, and you don't want to be last in that race. And I think they should consider how can quantum be used to grow their business or make them more competitive or allow them to grow market share against their competitors who are, many of whom are starting to get educated on quantum today. So those are the primary things in my mind. Nate, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, but that would be
Yeah, and maybe Nate, it would be great, even just some specific questions you think board members should be asking management or at least posing as it relates to, quantum and its impending capabilities.
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, right? Cryptography is part of how we do business in the world. It is extremely important. And anytime that you go out and you try to build a powerful computer of any kind, cryptography is threatened by that computer because cryptography is built around the fact that it is costly for computers to calculate certain things. So when quantum computers come in and change the rules suddenly, that is pretty disruptive. And so RSA is one area where a quantum computer definitely is something that people should think about. I do want to say, like, the world is not going to break. You're not going to wake up one day
right.
quantum computers have destroyed security and communications and so forth. So I wouldn't worry on that level. However, it is important to prepare for this. Cryptographic standards definitely have to be updated as quantum computers are coming online. Physicists have been seeing this coming for a while, and we like to be responsible folk and bring technology into the world in a responsible way. I would encourage boards and corporations, large and small, to look at what the National Institutes of Standards has put together for what they call the post-quantum cryptography world. Post-quantum crypto is the key word there. You can also look at the Department of Homeland Security, which is also working with NIST to prepare not just the U.S. federal government, but also the U.S. economy at large for how to prepare for this moment that quantum computing and quantum communication are starting to come online and starting to affect some of the security standards and so forth. There's disruption is a funny word, right? I mean, if you are really a deep thinker about disruption, you realize that it is risk and it is opportunity at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would also focus on the positive risk aspects. If you are an organization that has a particular competency, that particularly if it involves information processing, you should be thinking about how quantum computing will impact that technology stack. And remember that you've got other types of risk going on, not just cryptography and security, but also the positive risk of this technology coming and changing how people do things or the insights that they can get from computing at large.
So, Ed and Nate, we do have some questions coming in just about what alternatives are being developed. And I do think, Nate, you did a great job of talking about quantum resilience. That's really what this is boards asking those questions about their vendors and
Yes.
third-party risk and beginning the discussion around quantum resilience. Can you quickly just tell people, I don't want to scare them with this phrase, but cryptographic agility, that's how I first got involved with quantum, was I was looking at some cryptographic agility providers.
Mhm.
Can you maybe just briefly explain to people what that means and why it matters and why it's probably like the first step in building a quantum resilient plan?
Yeah, so I mean, at a technology level, there are lots of ways to make systems cryptographically secure. And RSA is just kind of one that the world landed on, kind of arbitrarily. And if you really want to build a good security system, what you need is at some point you need something that is just very difficult to invert and is expensive to compute. So the RSA definitely is susceptible to disruption from quantum, but there are a few things that we know are still going to be hard for a quantum computer to calculate. And so the National Institute of Standards, in particular, about 5 years ago, came up with three different encryption methods that use algorithms that classical computers can calculate on, basically a drop-in replacement for RSA and ECC that we believe are immune to the power of a quantum computer. Okay. Now, it's actually the hardest question in the world to ask a quantum physicist, what can a quantum computer not do well? We barely know what it can do well yet. That's a step beyond to say that it will never be good at this. But NIST has done the best job that it can. And so they basically have three standards. And if you go to the NIST website on post-quantum cryptography, you'll see those standards listed. Vendors are starting to incorporate some of those post-quantum crypto methods. And so if you want to get ahead of the curve, you can look at the vendors that are starting to explore that area. It is, from a physicist standpoint, it's not hard to implement these standards. But from a technology stack standpoint, there's a whole retooling of,
Right,
of actual, equipment that has to be done to really
right.
implement those standards. And I do think that it's worth understanding who is starting to think about that, who is competent in that space, and especially in the telecommunications industry, who is really ahead of the curve versus behind.
That's right. That's right. And I think you had a comment.
I was going to offer Jackie for the board members in the audience that are getting this introduction to quantum today. PwC actually put out a good summary last month in February, what directors need to know about quantum. Like that would be a good starting point to download that and read it. As to your specific questions, like I would think after reading that, board members should ask their management teams, like, have you thought about or done anything on quantum? And could somebody prepare kind of a summary of,
High level
um,
assessment.
yeah, risk
Right,
mitigation and opportunity
right.
optimization related to quantum?
Right. No, that's a great point. And I also agree with you. And I also think third parties and third party vendors, all of our companies, I feel, at least the companies where I serve on boards, um, third party vendors, we're all becoming more reliant. And yet, it's so critical to see what their encryption standards are and what they're doing and how they would be impacted. Because even if you think you've got a good plan, your third party vendors might not be as prepared.
Right, right.
So, one other question, just we're getting some great questions here in the chat that I wanted to sort of mention. So, of course, one question is I think this is a good one. People are wondering what is going to happen to semiconductors. Innovation in technology and semiconductors, will they continue to exist, Nate, or will they go away?
I
Inquiring
think
minds want to know.
Yeah, I think for quite some time, the semiconductor industry is safely in charge of our information processing. There's plenty of work to be done there. I will say that energy efficiency in classical information processing in semiconductors is a very important area, especially as we go into AI.
Yep.
I will tell you that if you look at the energy resources consumed by data centers over time and compare it to the world's energy reserves, it will keep you up at night when those two lines intersect. That's the best reason to really push on quantum computers because they are not just exponentially faster at certain things, but exponentially more efficient. But I will say that it is very, very unlikely that classical computers are going to go anywhere. Quantum computers are very bad at some of the things that classical computers are very good at. So I wouldn't rush out and dump stock.
Excellent. Thank you for saying that. I also, there's a great question in there just about critical infrastructure in the US. And it'd be great if Ed, you or Nate, one of you could just comment on what is going on in that regard to preparation and being quantum resilient and quantum prepared.
Maybe I'll start and hand it over to Nate. I saw another question come across the screen about what are our foreign adversaries doing, and
Yes.
just by happenstance, Nate and I got a text this morning from one of our colleagues that there's a academic website archive where people post the results, and it looks like, we're obviously not alone in this race, and China's making great progress in quantum computing too. So your question on infrastructure is a very good one. Nate, I don't feel, I think you'd be far better than me answering that specific question, but we do have to worry about that.
Nate?
Yeah. I mean, so many countries, especially the most technologically advanced, have national strategies that they put together for quantum technologies that date back even 10 years or more. And those are very active strategies sessions and thinking that go everywhere from like vulnerabilities in the supply chain to kind of workforce dynamics and to like sovereign capabilities. And, of course, we all hope that the world can stay a very open place with open borders and trade and so forth. But we also know that occasionally trade gets impacted by kind of global economic factors. One of the things that we worry about a lot is that, quantum computers are made out of funny stuff, right? I mean, things that, supplies and parts that really don't show up in other types of technology. Good examples that our computers work off of photonics. They're crystals that are only grown in Russia and China. So a part of the strategy for how a nation really prepares itself for the advent of quantum computers is also make sure that we understand like what these things are made out of and how the supply chain dynamics of that work. So the U.S. government, I'm very happy to say, is making very strategic, carefully thought out, kind of laser focused, kind of with a scalpel investments into parts of the supply chain that are really critical for quantum computers. And I think that this is incredibly smart. It definitely gives us a little bit of buffer from the impact of things like tariffs. But also, many of these supplies and parts are also dual use. They show up in weapon systems as well as in quantum computers. And so, that puts us in a precarious position where we need to understand how this new kind of emerging tech stack works and make sure that we're kind of on the game.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit and go back to Gen AI and quantum and talk more about, I'd love to hear both of you, Ed and Nate, just how the combination of these two supercharges applications and results. And maybe this is also too why there's this arms race, because whomever gets quantum with Gen AI, it's sort of like they can leapfrog ahead. But you guys can maybe, Nate, if you want to start off.
Yeah, I mean, so one important thing to think about is that people who think about how to design an algorithm or a computer program for a quantum computer are pretty few and far between. There's probably 3 orders of magnitude more people working on classical computer programs. And I mean, it's clear from Gen AI that Gen AI can write computer programs, classical ones, and we're seeing a big impact on kind of the professional sphere for people that come up with good ideas for algorithms. What's really interesting about quantum is that AI can come up with quantum algorithms. This is for sure true now, and the impact of a well-designed algorithm is actually really interesting. In a sense, for us people who make hardware, what it does is it moves the goalposts. If you write a really good quantum algorithm and AI is starting to get great at this, the number of qubits that you need and the number of gates in a quantum computer to make it work goes down, right? And so there's a bit of a race to useful quantum computing that works at both ends. The hardware is getting better,
Right.
the algorithms are getting better, and they're starting to get an AI boost. And these two effects together are really moving things faster together. This is why people like me will not tell you the day that they're going to come together and we get energy, because the chance that I am wrong about that is extremely high, right? And if anything, we've been thinking that it would be coming much later, and we're discovering every day that there's another thing that kind of moves the goalposts and makes the hardware tech stack much better. So it's exciting to be alive for this, but I thought wouldn't it be great to be a human and come up with the best quantum computing algorithm? I want it named after me, right? We have that great tradition of naming things after the people that come up with them. I worry that the first quantum computing algorithm that gives advantage might have to be named after Claude or
Yeah.
ChatGPT or whatever Gen AI system actually came up with the algorithm that works.
Um, Ed, do you have a comment that you want to make?
I think Nate covered the quantum AI synergies earlier. I think it basically gets down to quantum data. Quantum computing can provide better data than classical computing, kind of supercharge AI and learning models, which is why the AI leaders like NVIDIA and Anthropic and Google are so interested in it. And we've announced a partnership with NVIDIA using our quantum computer in their advanced quantum lab, and they obviously invested in us, so they see the play there. And I also mentioned early on the Google investment into Quera. That was not led by Google corporate or Google proper. That was actually championed by the Google Quantum AI business unit
Hmm.
executives. Again, the synergies there. So I think it's all around the quantum data being able to enable next gen AI.
Right. Actually, Larissa, if you can pull up, there's a picture that I think kind of underscores what Ed and Nate said, just about the quantum AI interplay. Just sharing this because we have so many people tuned in today, and basically Ed and Nate really spoke about this, which is this virtuous circle, if you will, of quantum and AI. And it's just as Nate was saying, how AI is actually helping them get smarter about solving some of the quantum issues. But then you also have, or roadblocks, I should say, and then quantum, obviously, once it gets to where there's advantage, the ability for the two to um, mutually benefit each other. There we go. Is kind of supercharged. So I just wanted to pull this up because I thought it might be a helpful framework to share. We can take it down now.
And Jackie, I do think that these partnerships between pure quantum computing companies and companies that are leading the AI revolution are incredibly important.
Right.
And
Right.
in some ways, like the delay to useful quantum computing may actually be the time it takes before those successful partnerships take off, rather than the time that it takes once they take off to pioneer that new art. Because I think it's going to happen fast when the right groups of people are getting together.
Yeah. Hey, so there is an interesting question in the chat about, can you frame board member risk and action in a time frame today versus 3 years? And I know we talked about getting started with just assessing where you think the risk is and getting the beginnings of a quantum assessment and resilience plan worked out, figuring out how exposed you are if RSA or whatever standard you're using to encrypt gets broken. So we kind of laid some of that out. But what I thought maybe you could comment on is, a couple of years out, just how you would be thinking about the type of risk and opportunity, let's do both, that board directors and management would want to begin to plan for. How do you begin to plan for that? So maybe Ed, you could start us off on that.
Sure, I'll try, Jackie. I think first you should like invest in quantum literacy today at the leadership level. Like you don't have to be atomic physicist, but you do, your CTO and CISO should understand the fundamentals of quantum and what may lie ahead. And you don't have to make decisions yet, but you need to start building the quantum, literacy to have a basis for making future decisions. Secondly, I think, you probably at some point in the not too distant future should conduct a crypto readiness audit to make sure how um, well prepared or not prepared you are, and to then, like, if you're not well prepared, immediately start on remedial actions. And I mean, thirdly, you could actually have your management team start, exploring quantum without overcommitting. Like there are quantum computers. And again, I saw some questions come across the screen.
Yes.
When do we get to quantum advantage or quantum utility? And we're not there today, but it is coming. And I'll defer to my good friend Nate as to some time frames, but it's coming in the not too distant future. But you can start trying out quantum like on AWS or other, hyperscalers, so you can start uh, uh, getting to that quantum literacy now versus waiting and having a major fire drill to deal with when the day quantum advantage
I
happens.
was just going to say, yeah, are there like any pilot examples that you guys know of? I know you probably have some you're doing at Quira,
Yeah.
but certainly I don't want you to divulge anything that's,
Yeah.
confidential. But maybe if you could give a generic example or two of pilots that you have in the works with companies.
Do you want to cover that one, Nate?
Yeah, I can. I mean, we have a few ongoing relationships that I probably shouldn't name names about.
We understand. I understand.
But it's kind of interesting actually. If you'd asked this question 5 years ago, it was much harder to gain that quantum literacy that Ed is talking about, and it's probably a sign of the kind of maturity of the industry that now quantum literacy is something that you can actually go out there and work with special built organizations that will consult on that and actually educate your team. So if you look, those companies are out there. They'll even give you ways to self-assess. They'll give consulting services that look kind of more in depth at what your company is doing. And many of them are really good founding teams and have highly educated people to help you with that. Um, Part of your self-assessment should also be about what your company does and how much it relies on high performance information processing. And so in many cases, you may find that your organization depends on that a lot. In that case, it may make sense to do more. What many companies do is start a small team inside the company whose basic purpose is to start kicking the tires on quantum computers. And, I would say this about any place where there's potential for disruption. The absolute best way to learn something is to go on offense and start using it. So we do this often with corporations. Oftentimes they'll have a team that is kind of either purpose-built by hiring PhDs that already understand quantum information sciences a bit to come into the organization and start looking in areas of interest. So we work with a lot of corporations in that way. The US government does a lot of that as well. I sleep better at night knowing that, things like nuclear stewardship and so forth, there are teams inside the government that are kind of trying to understand what the impact of a quantum computer is by actually trying to use a quantum computer and making it work.
Mhm.
So, that's a different level of engagement. For that level, typically you would work together with a quantum computing company, kind of like ours,
Mhm.
kind of like IBM or the other organizations that are really kind of on a use innovation kind of platform, and they're able to give you access to their machines. All of these things are important. There are different forms of education. What's right for your organization really depends where on that spectrum you are, of your dependence on especially high performance compute. So if you are in the pharmaceutical industry, you may have a very different calculation on that than if you're in the automotive, kind of supply chain or something. But I do think it's important to both learn what quantum is, but also learn what your dependence on information processing is, and kind of try to bring those two things together. Definitely, soliciting the services of a consulting firm is useful for kind of the educational aspect of that. But if you need to do a deep dive into your own tech stack, nothing substitutes for having a few people in-house that just start to understand what quantum computing is and start to engage with it a little bit.
That was super, super helpful. There's another question in the chat that I want to bring up. It's an interesting question about cryptocurrencies and will quantum, it's a great question. Will quantum completely disrupt cryptocurrencies by, first off, breaking the cryptography that underpins the existing coins, but also flooding the market? I don't know if those are use cases, Nate or Ed, that you guys have thought about, but maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, actually, so we have thought about that a little bit. And so if there is really like a disruptive moment there, it's mostly in early generations of cryptocurrencies where there are particularly wallets which are stored with lost keys. In that case, a quantum computer might be able to retrieve that lost key. So there is a bit of an impact there. But this is one of the things I want to point out about cryptography in general. A quantum computer's impact really comes down to the details. And for quite some time, we've been using symmetric key distribution and things like this that actually make the impact of a quantum computer not so bad. So typically where we see a lot of impact in cryptography, it's in previously stolen information that is sitting with old cryptographic methods used to encrypt it, where its value is still there. But it was in an earlier day of kind of classical cryptography. To be honest with you, this isn't really just about quantum computers. Any breakthrough in computing power, starts to open these questions, right? So it's always the outdated information, the outdated secure communications that are really vulnerable.
Ed, did you have any comments?
I think Nate covered it very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no. So, so it's a great point. And I think this whole post-quantum encryption and beginning to think through, well, is your data protected and are you agile, right? This takes agility to a whole new level. I feel like, agility got introduced in probably the 90s in the agile environment and how we would develop software. And now it's really going to be about cryptographic agility. Like you said, Nate, everything keeps going down to the most minute level, in this case, cryptography.
Well, Jackie, at some point, quantum computers should be used to encrypt things, right?
Yes.
That's
Can you
going on.
comment? Can you comment on that maybe? Can you comment on that?
Well, I mean, I think it's shocking that we don't think about that very often, right? But computers have been improving since, I mean, a very long time ago, and cryptography has always been in danger, right? So, it may be a little bit different with the flavor of quantum computing and how it impacts this, but we should be doing the same things. I am shocked at how few people are actually using quantum computers to develop new encryption methods that are quantum encrypted. So that's one thing that, like if you want to educate an organization that depends on cryptography today, very fast on what is a quantum computer, how to get literate and everything, hey, why not go on offense?
Right. And I love your, I think quantum literacy and just beginning not only the organization, but the board, everyone beginning the journey of quantum literacy and doing it, like you said, in a way where you're on the offense. Certainly have to play some defense too, to ensure that the risks are all boxed and in check. But maybe as part of quantum resilience planning, it's really about what is our quantum literacy plan, of which quantum resilience might be a piece. And certainly that brings in things like cybersecurity, data governance, third-party vendor management, risk management, so on and so forth. I think a lot of companies still are modernizing their core processing, if you will. At least I've gone through that a few times with some of my companies. It's a great opportunity if you're going through any kind of transformation with your systems to kind of weave in, I think to your point, this quantum literacy element. As long as the hood's open, you might as well make sure you're ready for the next revolution that's coming.
I think what you'll find actually is that those who are thinking hard about cybersecurity today,
yes,
will probably tell you that the world ought to have some regrets about the way that AI came onto the scene and changed the cybersecurity landscape, and whether we were really prepared for the AI impact on cybersecurity. My feeling is that AI actually presents a much bigger cybersecurity risk and dimension to analyze than quantum computers do. Quantum computers really attack that root kind of key distribution aspect of RSA, but most of our cybersecurity threats are actually kind of human-induced things. So I think as you get your teams quantum ready and quantum literate, what you're going to find is that they feel a bit overtaxed by the cybersecurity issues of AI itself. So, I think you should keep an eye on both of those things. But I think the implications of AI plus quantum are yet more to think about. So probably should beef up in that way. And we should also think about how quantum computing comes onto the technology landscape in a way that is forewarned with how cybersecurity was impacted by AI and how we should be thinking about like just making sure that we are not kind of lulled into a kind of complacency by thinking that this is a long way off and then being surprised when it comes. That's exactly what happened with AI. I think we thought about AI for too long. We thought that it was moving too slowly, and we forgot about the cybersecurity aspects of it. And we probably didn't prepare as much as we should have.
So Nate, I have to ask, so is it 36 months away, 4 years, 2 years? Like,
Yeah,
can you,
I will say when we started our company about 7 years ago, we would typically say, it's going to be a decade or more. And we made progress in about 5 years. We achieved what at least I had thought that we might take 10 or 15 years. So when we make projections, we are now very careful because we've surprised ourselves with how quickly things have moved. Many of us are coming from scientific backgrounds, and you may not understand as a scientist the power of capital, how quickly things can move, really bring that to bear. And I think we're kind of learning that impact. And I don't think if you polled most of the quantum computing companies that you will hear the word decade that often anymore. And so you had brought up, is it going to be 36 months? I can't tell you that it's not going to be within 36 months. That's about as far as I'll go to make
okay, that's fair. That's
But I
fair.
will,
Well, that tells us something. If you said you can't say that it won't be within 36. So, I mean, that tells you something.
but Jackie,
I'll
remember
work
that.
on I'll
Well,
work on Nate for an exact date for the June event, Jackie.
Okay, that sounds good. That's true. We're going to be, yeah, we're going to be continuing this discussion, and who knows? I'm sure there'll be some breakthroughs between now and the summer. There was one question in the chat that I did want to put out because I just think it's a great question. So, and I don't know if you guys can answer this, but it's the question: when quantum experts meet privately, what do they most vigorously debate? And so, yeah, Nate and Ed, it would just be great to, kind of, what is it really like when the real experts get together? What is it that they're debating when it comes to this technology and its impact?
so we haven't actually landed on the best qubit yet. So we
Oh,
don't know whether we should make a quantum bit out of light, out of matter, like atoms, like we do, out of kind of chip-based constructs, things like kind of single electron transistors and all of these interesting different modalities. We're pretty sure that the ones that have kind of produced that qubit and tested it in the laboratory, we do kind of understand how they work. But the biggest question is which ones really scale? Just like the transistor, there were many ways to make transistors, but only a few that you could kind of mass manufacture at a small scale and make a processor that had many of them on it flawlessly. So that is the thing that we debate the most, is that we've each come in with our backgrounds and our favorite quantum bit, and we're mostly today trying to understand the practical aspects of how we actually manufacture technology at scale with it. I think that's still the kind of rigorous debate that you'll hear in the back hallways.
wow. And so if everybody agreed that there was a qubit that was preferred, would it be relatively easy to substitute that in and kind of go with it? I mean, that just sounds like a huge
Well, back
shift.
back to the power of capital. If you can narrow up the aperture and throw the capital behind the thing that is most likely to take off, it will move yet faster. And that hasn't really happened yet. But I think that the arguments for where to narrow the aperture up are starting to become clear. The data is coming in. Certain technologies have built processors and scaled them. Other ones are still working on that very first qubit. And I think as the analysis is coming in, that narrowing up of the aperture is really going to accelerate the field because we concentrate on the thing that works.
Okay. Great. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to put them into the chat. I'm going to ask Ed and Nate for each of you to tell us what your 3 brief final takeaways are that you suggest our attendees take back to their boards. So, Ed, let's start with you.
All right, we'll save the best for last, Jackie. First, I would say, like, leaving this introductory quantum presentation today, I would try to get a higher level understanding of quantum and, consider how it applies to your companies. And finally, I would say, like, act now and don't wait. Build that literacy, task management with a quantum plan at some level. And, for all the board members in the audience, I do think that PwC, book from February is a good place to start as a good guide for what questions should board members be asking to fulfill their fiduciary duties. So that's what I would kind of net out on, Jackie.
Okay, no, that's great. Nate, how about you?
I enjoy the ride. I mean, it's going to be a fantastic few years here, and it's gonna change a lot of things. Let's not make the same mistakes that we did with AI. This stuff is coming out of the lab as we speak into product form, and it's starting to have real world implications that we can kind of gauge. We should become aware of those things, and understanding how they work may take time. The time that it may take your organization to start to understand what the impact is going to be is now probably comparable to the time it takes for this to really start impacting the world. So that's a bit frightening, but the message is there. There's clear steps to take, and we've got support and resources out there, whether they be in the private domain, the public domain. You just reach out for help with that, and literacy will come quickly.
That's great. Yeah, and I would just add that we talked a bit about the risks and also the opportunities, but I think what Nate and Ed talked about in terms of just get started now and begin to lay out that roadmap and be focused on becoming literate in this next wave of technology is really critical because as we saw from the first 2 slides, McKinsey estimated it at 2 trillion, which it's probably underestimated. And the second slide, which basically showed, I think there was only one industry, media, for example, was like the least impacted. Everything else was either a medium to high impact. So it's big and it's pervasive. And I'm going to say, and the future is here. At least I can't get Nate to say exactly when, but it sounds like it's maybe sooner than some of us think. So on that note, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ellen.
So thank you all for attending today, and many thanks to Jackie, Ed, and Nate. And at some point, I'll show up on the screen, I know. We have a few announcements before you leave. We have many exciting programs coming up at NACD New England. The list should be on the screen about now. 3 very important dates that I'd like to highlight. The ones you've got on the board right now are several upcoming events, but the 3, what we call save the dates, are the Global Strategy Retreat. This is focused on March 31st, an exclusive global strategy retreat embracing global uncertainty in the 21st century, transforming risk into a competitive advantage. This retreat is the only one of its kind in the U.S., exclusively designed for board directors of both public and private companies whose businesses are impacted by the rapid shifts in geopolitics, geoeconomics, and geotechnology. So we just have a couple slots left for that because we're keeping it small. So if you're interested, please sign up. On April 9th, we have our all-day Aspiring Public Company Director Program. That's for directors of private, not-for-profit or private for-profit companies or C-suite executives, people who are looking to move onto public company boards. And on June 4th is our all-day advanced topics for experienced public company directors. You have to be a sitting public company director to join that. We keep it small. By the way, we're going to have Nate, Ed, and Jackie back to continue this conversation. We'll see the kinds of changes that have happened in quantum between today and in June. And I know there'll be some exciting things to talk about at that point. So please join us on our New England programs, either virtually or in person, as we've indicated. But please don't forget the survey. The link is in the chat. There's going to be a QR code on your screen, and it will be in our follow-up email, along with those slides, by the way. Please take a moment to fill it out. We really do value your input. We use the comments to shape our programs going forward. Thank you so much for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at future programs, either virtually or in person. Thanks again.